Okay, I think we'll get going. Glad to see people saying hello from the chat. Very nice. And I want to say good evening, everyone. I'm Richard Moses, president of the Lower East Side Preservation Initiative, also known as LESPI. I'm glad to welcome you to our webinar tonight, Jarmulowsky Bank Building, the Resurrection of a Lower East Side Landmark, with Ron Castellano and Kerry Colhane. Those of you who aren't familiar with LESPI, we're a not-for-profit group formed in 2007, whose mission is the preservation of the historic Lower East Side, which includes the East Village, Lower East Side below Houston Street, Chinatown, Little Italy, and the Bowery. We work to preserve the Lower East Side through education, outreach, and advocacy, primarily to affect New York City Landmarks Commission Historic District and Individual Landmark designation for historic streetscapes and individual buildings. Along with preserving the area's beautiful historic architecture, we also push to help maintain the traditional culture and diversity of the Lower East Side, one of the most important historic areas of the country due to its immigration, political, and artistic history, a living history that continues to the present day. During the lecture, please put any questions you have in the Q&A section, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation, and although we may not be able to answer everyone's questions, we'll answer as many as we can. We're now going to do a quick poll to see where everybody lives. Don't worry, the answers are anonymous. Okay, I think that should do it. To let you know, about 40% of you are Lower East Siders, about half from New York City outside the Lower East Side, about 7% from the tri-state area, 7% from the US, and we have one person from outside the US, so welcome especially to that person. Okay, I now want to introduce our speakers for tonight. Kerry Colhane is an architectural historian who, for over 20 years, has documented the urban immigrant neighborhoods of the Lower East Side. In 2015, she curated the exhibition Rediscovering the Architecture of Poi Gum Lee, 1900 to 1968, at the Museum of Chinese in America, a survey of the life and career of Chinatown's first Chinese-American architect. In 2019, she curated, with Stefano Morello, an examination of immigration, housing, and public health policy at the turn of the 20th century in the Lung Block, a New York City slum and forgotten Italian immigrant community for the New York City Municipal Archives. Kerry's forthcoming doctoral thesis at the University College London explores an architectural and spatial history of Chinatown since 1882. For the past 8 years, her research has informed the rehabilitation and restoration of the former S. Jarmulowsky's Bank. Ron Castellano has been a leader and prominent figure in the revitalization of the Lower East Side as a developer and architect with a special focus on historically significant buildings. In 1999, Ron established Studio Castellano, which began to make its mark on the Lower East Side with such notable projects as the Garfield Building and the Forward Building, the area's most distinguished architectural landmark. Studio Castellano has provided full architectural services for hospitality projects, retail and commercial office spaces, as well as for private residences throughout the city. The studio also provides master planning services and has recently worked with Seward Park Conservancy and the Seward Park Co-op on the revitalization of Seward Park. Studio Castellano is currently working on restorations, including the historic Jarmulowsky Bank Building and the Upper West Side's iconic Hotel Belclair. So Kerry will start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate that very generous introduction. And I'm going to share my screen. And we will start. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this evening. It's actually a tremendous pleasure to be able to revisit this project in retrospect after spending the last nearly 9 years working on it. So we're happy to be able to share this with you. And so tonight, Ron and I will be talking about the former S. Jarmulowsky Bank at the corner of Canal and Orchard on the Lower East Side. And this building has been a contributing resource to the Lower East Side National Register Historic District, and more recently, an individual New York City landmark. And for anybody who is familiar with the neighborhood or has lived in the neighborhood, for the last 40 or more years, 30 years, you're probably pretty familiar with this hulking ruin that sort of followed you around the neighborhood. It was pretty much visible from everywhere because for the longest time, it was the tallest building around. And even historically, so here's a photo on the left, which I love, which is from taken from Seward Park when it had this very fancy pavilion. But the building was always sort of lurking in the background. The building, the photo on the right shows a shot right up Canal Street, which is maybe it's the view that's the most commonly experienced. You could also see it from the Manhattan Bridge Colonnade. It's there in the background. And even here lurking behind St. Teresa's from Rutgers Street. So it was always there. But for the last, since about 1990, it lost its iconic dome and dome spire. And so since then, it has sort of taken a little bit of a downward spiral. And so tonight we're going to talk about both the history of this building as a bank and the history of the building as a restoration project. And the project has been nearly completed with New York State and federal historic preservation investment tax credits. And therefore, the work that has been done on this property was guided by the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. And that means that we had a very standard preservation procedure to follow in making decisions about how to deal with the restoration, reconstruction, and rehabilitation of this building. And so to orient you to our talk a little bit tonight, and also to the evolution of this building in the last decade, this is a drawing that was done by Ron's office. And if you look on the left, you can see what it looked like when the project started. So some of the windows had been bricked up, the dome was missing, there was the old equipment that was on the roof, the balustrade was gone. The drawing in the middle shows sort of what we thought it was going to look like mid-project. And then on the right shows what it will look like when it's finally complete. And so tonight, we're going to talk about 3 different spaces in the building: the historic banking hall, which is 1. We're going to take a little visit to one of the loft spaces, which is 2, and then the cornice and the dome at the top. So, and we're going to discuss them in that order. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the bank and of the banker, Sender Jarmulowsky. As a bank, the building enjoyed a pretty brief and abortive history, but Sender Jarmulowsky's banking business enjoyed a much longer run prior to the construction of his Beaux-Arts Tower. So Alexander Sender Jarmulowsky was born in 1841 in Grajewo, which was part of Poland that was under Russian control at the time. And he was orphaned very young and sent to yeshiva, where he became a very learned Talmudic scholar. He married into a wealthy merchant family. His wife, Rebecca, was the daughter of wealthy merchants, and they lived in Hamburg. And in 1868, he and his brother-in-law formed a company that offered passage and exchange services. So if you were immigrating or leaving the country, you were likely going by ship. And so his business was to purchase bulk tickets and resell them to people. And he was also reportedly multilingual, which helped him print tickets in multiple languages and provide services in multiple languages. In 1873, however, he was forced from Hamburg and he immigrated to New York. And he and his family settled at the corner of Orchard and Canal. And so this building that you see on the left is the building that was there when they arrived. And he operated an office on the first floor, and they actually lived above it. And so this is a pretty interesting story, just as a story of immigrant banking, which I think deserves its own webinar, quite frankly. The phenomenon of the immigrant bank is really what helped build the Lower East Side. And it wasn't just limited to the Jewish community. There were Italian banks, there were banks from many different ethnicities. And so Jarmulowsky's bank largely served the Jewish Lower East Side, and they provide commercial loan services. They provided remittances, letter writing, translation, and this was a really important service on the Lower East Side. And until his death, Jarmulowsky enjoyed a tremendous reputation, and unfortunately, it was soon squandered by his ne'er-do-well sons. But the museum at Eldridge Street has a lot more information on him because he was central to the founding and the funding of the Eldridge Street Synagogue. And so for this history, actually, I have to say I'm indebted to the writer Rory Nugent, who has compiled a tremendous amount of history on Sender Jarmulowsky. So speaking of his ne'er-do-well sons, his sons Meyer and Lewis started their own immigrant bank, which was located at 165 East Broadway, which coincidentally is the location of Ron's office. And they started this in 1903. And Meyer was the designer of this building, which you can see I'm indicating with the arrow. And it was this pretty crazy looking Moorish revival building. It was very ornate. Meyer had actually gone to Columbia to study architecture. But he took deposits to invest in real estate speculation uptown, and he was a founding member of the, quote, Committee of 30, which was actually a group of white Harlem property owners who were intent on forcing out Black Harlemites. So he was not a great guy. And in 1914, he ended up running for his life from an angry mob that was seeking to cash out their deposits when his bank failed. So I really love this photo because it shows this building, which is so hard to imagine on East Broadway. And it also shows the long lost building at the corner of Rutgers and East Broadway that had been demolished in the 20s or 30s to make way for the F train tunnel underneath. So not to be outdone by his sons, Sender Jarmulowsky engaged the architects Rouse and Goldstone in 1910 to design what would be the first high-class modern bank building on the Lower East Side. And the designer Harmon Goldstone, who's a partner in the firm, is the one who actually designed the building. And the Beaux-Arts design took advantage of this corner location, which was emphasized with this tall dome spire. And the tripartite organization of the facade followed the style of the period, and it drew on Renaissance revival and Beaux-Arts precedent for both its form and its ornament. So it's structured like a capitol. It has a base, which is a 3-story rusticated limestone base. The central shaft of the building is a 6-story beige brick shaft. And then the capitol is terracotta, it's pretty ornate. And then the capitol itself is topped with a Corinthian cornice and a balustraded parapet, urns, the tempietto, and domed spire. So this was a very ornate building for the Lower East Side. And the dome spire was unusual for the Lower East Side, but it was actually not unusual in New York City's architectural history at this moment. It was probably inspired by the Lantern of Demosthenes, which was inspiring a number of architects, including McKinley and White, who put it on top of the municipal building, which was being built at the same time. They also put versions of it on the original Madison Square Garden, which you can see on the lower right. And the Soldiers and Sailors Monument also featured this, a version of this. So the dome spire making an appearance on the Lower East Side was a big deal. The bank opened in May 1912, and it was also a big deal. There were street fairs, and it was quite an event. But unfortunately, Sender Jarmulowsky did not enjoy his bank for long. He died less than a month after it opened. But the bank lived on, and it was published in Architecture and Building and other architecture publications. And so this was actually really critical because these were the earliest known photographs of the building when it was completed, which were really crucial to understanding the building. And again, here are 2 more interior photos, and these are really the only known interior photos of the banking hall. And these were published as well because this was a very
we're looking at the earlier. I think you got the, yeah, there you go.
Can you see the
yeah, now I
interior?
got it. Yep, now I got it.
Thank you. I can't tell what's going on. I just got a message that said my internet connection is unstable. So if I disappear,
okay,
sorry. Yeah, so actually the Wirtz Brothers image, which is on the right, was really crucial because it's an extremely high resolution glass plate negative, which we learned to study closely to try to put this building back together. So the bank did not last long. Sender's widow, Rebecca, who had been a partner in the business since 1899, turned it over to her sons, and they soon ran it into the ground. And World War I didn't help any banking business at the time. So by the 1920s, it was no longer a bank at all. And you can see, I think in this photo, if you have a large enough screen, this was already, the banking hall had already been turned into a restaurant. And these photos are from the late 30s or early 40s. So that first floor banking hall was a restaurant. And it had been many other things too. So after it was a restaurant, it was garment lofts above. I mean, it had always been garment lofts above, but you know, over a century, it had been a bank, lofts that turned out everything from kimonos to overalls. It was a piano factory. It was a nightclub, maybe even a brothel. It was nonprofit offices. So it served the Lower East Side in many, many ways. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ron, who can discuss how this project came about, sort of the scope, and how we end up putting it back together.
Well, thanks, Carrie, and thank you, Richard, and thanks everybody for joining this presentation. So I'll talk more to the nuts and bolts of putting it back together. So this is an image of showing where there was a restaurant. It was all, the whole base was chopped up, painted many, many times over. A lot of the stonework was deteriorated, either from the salt or just the damage of the, you know, shipping entrance. Clock was recently, maybe, you know, that was also stolen when they were building the building in the back at One Orchard. You see the window infill. So my history was with the previous owner. We landmarked the building, worked with the owner to get it landmarked. And then when he sold it, luckily I was to be able to, you know, had a long history with the building. So I was hired on to help with the hotel renovation. A lot of the sort of, you know, probing into the structure and into the existing conditions really, it didn't happen much. We didn't do a lot of engineering before the owners actually bought it. So it's, you know, we really opened up a can of worms as we got into this, and, you know, with the terracotta deteriorating and things like that. So this was, again, for the first floor, the image on the right, you're looking to the east. You can see there's like a, you know, the doors were all, the original windows and the balustrade at the base were all removed and cut out and had some metal bifold doors. They had put in a floor in the banking hall. You're seeing the steel mezzanine that was put in. The image on the right, the plaster ceiling was all cut up and sprinklers ran through it. It was painted many times. A lot of the details were just sheetrocked over. Pieces of the arched plaster work were removed. The wall in the back, you look directly to the south is missing, and to the right as well. So, and you see the photo from below, all the windows were cut up. This is also, yeah, you can go to the next slide. So this is, again, this is looking north. You can see that the window opening and where there was the arched base of the window and the balustrade, that was removed and cut open. The banking lobby, you're looking through, there's a little hole there with next to the scaffolding. It was interesting. The bank had, you know, it was, I think, 14 inches thick of concrete, so you couldn't break into the bank. So it was a major wall that separated the rest of the building. Layers and layers on the floor. It was, I think, is 10 inches or more. The red arrow shows little bits and pieces of some of the historic details. That's one of the pilasters in marble that was able to be uncovered. This slide on the right, you can see some of the base marble. It was actually a curved portion, the chair rail. The image on the left shows pieces of the window. So we kind of, you know, whatever we could document and uncover really helped informed. And the photograph, as Carrie said, was unbelievable amount of detail in it. You can see the veins in the marble. It was so clear. So that also helped. Next. So the image on the left, we still had the mezzanine floor that was put in. You see everything all chopped up. The windows were double hung windows in the original arches. The wall on the left was all ripped open. This also shows where we stripped the layers of paint off the ceiling, and it was decided to just keep it in that condition. And Carrie, you could speak to the paint.
Yes, we actually had the preservation professional Mary Kay Judy come in and give us a full paint analysis to understand what the former palette was for this ceiling. And it was a pretty fancy polychrome ceiling, very elaborate with metallic and other images, other colors. But the owners decided that they wanted to keep this sort of patina of age, sort of give an idea of what the building had been through to people who'd been in it.
Yeah, and it was great to be able to just document with, you know, the research that she did in the analysis, so that we do have a record of what that ceiling was as it was stripped down to the plaster. The Botticino Classico marble walls, I went to Milan to try to match some of the blocks of stone to the original texture and pattern of the original marble, because it's really as they dig into the mountain of this marble, it changes. So we actually, the owner purchased massive blocks of marble so that they could be replicated to the original details. The Tennessee pink marble on the floor, the can plaster on the upper walls. And again, and Carrie, you can speak to the fact that this was almost a mini Grand Central.
Yes, the Camstone Plaster was an extremely obscure plaster technique that was probably only popular between 1910 and 1913. And it, as we did the materials analysis, we discovered that this literally is the same palette as Grand Central Terminal, which opened in 1913. But the Camstone Plaster was a technique that we had to figure out how to replicate, because it doesn't, it's an old-fashioned, outdated technique. So that was a very interesting journey of discovery.
And yeah, you can see the details on the right-hand side, and it's many, many, many months of work from, I don't know if you have another image of the capitals, if you see the plasters and the capitals that were carved, hand carved, and then manufactured. Yeah, and then the keystones. Yeah.
Yeah, these had all been, all the keystones, excuse me, all the keystones were missing. So we had to understand what they should have looked like and then fabricate them. And similarly with this cornice, this lower cornice, this was gone when they had inserted that floor. They chopped out any evidence of that cornice, so we had to replicate that as well. And then let's see where we go next.
Okay, another image. The left-hand image is it's the same view of the lobby. You can see the transformation. The image on the right, it's the plywood is just protecting the floor, which is in place. The arch windows operable. We cast the bronze, door handles and opening and the latches and the locks. This doesn't show the curved door in the corner, but that was also all custom made. And a little bit of in this image, you can see the other side and the marble wall that was put into the west, the back wall, the original arch, the clock was all hand carved and then manufactured in marble. The clock is being installed. You see the windows and the leaded glass. There's actually sliding, which are operable. We were able to, the other thing with this whole building is we brought it up to 2008 code. It's got seismic bracing. We built a subfloor, combined it with the building 60 canal. It's got cogen units. So there's a lot of mechanical infrastructure that was able to be incorporated into this historic building. And like this, there's no sprinklers. Everything was hidden in the plaster ceiling. The vents are in the cornice. that was removed when they put in the mezzanine. The emergency lights are in the cornice as well. So we spent a lot of time trying to hide as much of the updated mechanicals as we possibly could. Okay, 10th floor, looks beautiful on the left. Again, it was, you know, the water damage to the floors. Luckily, there was some base molding and some window molding, which we were able to replicate, and that's about it in terms of details, architectural details.
Sorry.
You can see the paint and the plaster condition. I mean, it was a major undertaking, and we started digging into the walls. The other thing is we were able to insulate the walls as much as we possibly could. Again, trying to incorporate and make it in, you know, as you know, in terms of the mechanicals, as up to date as possible. We kept the again, and this is an enormous amount of expense to show the existing beams and you know, to restore the beam structure so that when you see the view from the street and you look through a window, you will actually see what was exactly, you know, existing there. The fact that this was a loft building and then we divided it up into hotel rooms and working through SHPO with that. And Carrie, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but it was, again, going back and forth and making sure everything was in compliance.
Yeah, it was really important for us to maintain the feel, the loft feel, even though the space was being subdivided. Part of the tax credit process is really to keep the spirit of the building alive and keep it legible, keep the history legible in the final rehabilitated building. And so the ceilings alone are something that I think go a long way to do that. And it was an enormous amount of work because some of them had to be veneered and patched, and it really came out beautifully, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and this, even the windows in here, these are curved glass windows, like an enormous amount of expense. And another thing we didn't, I mean, maybe it'll come up in another slide, but the curved brick, all custom made to match the existing brick. It was a very strange size, texture, and it took, you know, almost a year to get a matching brick sample that we could use.
We'll keep going up.
Okay, the dome reconstruction. Again, we were so lucky to have at least one drawing showing the sections and some plans, actual structural drawings, to recreate it and to do it in a way that we're very confident that it was, you know, matching the original dome, and even from the lantern. And so just little pieces that really helped inform the whole structure.
Yeah, because when we started, this is what it looked like. So we didn't have a huge amount to go on because not only was the dome missing, but the cornice, entire cornice was gone as well. And all of the terracotta ornament had been coated in this thick, sticky, cementy gunk.
Yeah, it's like a rubberized coating that actually hid a lot of the future problems that we couldn't really see because it was a very thick coating. So the terracotta from the cracks, it was literally like a glue holding all the skin together. It was like a skin coating the whole structure.
Yeah, you can see a little bit of that, the thickness of it in this detail. So even though the cornice was missing, we actually lucked out and had this tiny fragment of cornice return that helped us understand how fancy this cornice really was. Because otherwise we would never have known the level of detail that had gone into something that was, you know, think about it, this is 12 stories up in the sky, and this is the amount of detail that was put into the cornice.
Yep.
But this was the condition of the terracotta, which was pretty poor. A lot of open joints, a lot of cracking, a lot of missing elements.
And I think even just the water damage that came through the terracotta into the structure behind it, with the windows being ripped out and putting new ones in, it really compromised a lot of the structure around that. I mean, there were pieces of terracotta that actually were just stacked and not even tied back because they had replaced the windows, which were kind of incorporated into the structure. Cleaning process, there were a lot of stains that you can see on the right that is clean, but from the cracking and the staining and it was a pretty major amount of cleaning that we had to do to remove this coating. And then so we had to try to get it back to the original colors. And the whole goal was to do the least amount of replacement as we possibly could. You know, for landmarks, they don't want just to take the whole thing off and replace it. So we tried to keep as much as we could. This slide on the right shows after we removed the coating, there was a marble, the marble inserts that were also present that we were able to replicate. And again, some of this is, along the way as we're working on this, some of these things would pop out and then we would adjust the drawings and the submissions to Landmarks and SHPO.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay.
An itchy trigger finger this evening.
Yeah, okay.
In the cornice restoration process, so it included trying to salvage as much as possible of that upper crown element. But since the cornice was missing entirely, we had to figure out what it should have looked like. And really frustratingly, there were no photos that showed any amount of detail of the underside of the cornice. So we had to do a lot of research, looking at all of the other Rouse and Goldstone buildings of this period and style. Looking at the Corinthian order that they used on the building and trying to extrapolate from that what it should look like. And so we did it. And this is what it looks like now. This is the final cornice. And instead of it being in terracotta, it's actually created in fiberglass, which is much lighter, which the building will be thankful for. And if you were walking under the building, you'll be glad you don't have all this terracotta hanging over you. So it's a much lighter material, but it was matched very closely to the texture and the color of the original terracotta. And similarly, photos and images of the dome were studied to try to understand the ornament, because even though we had this sort of drawing that showed a few profiles, we didn't have any detail of the sculptural ornament other than photos. So we got really, really good at bumping up the contrast on Photoshop to try to pull out as much detail as we could. And there was some physical evidence. Ron, if you want to talk about what that roof
sure.
looked
So
like.
this is just like uncovering this is the roof. So that this is the roof level. So it had almost an 8-foot high parapet, and that is just to the bottom of the balustrade. We were lucky to have half a balustrade, again, on a corner detail, so that we were able to replicate it and know that we were actually matching the existing. This was the structure under the dome spire, little bits and pieces of it. We were actually in the rubble. There was like an extra piece of one of the columns. So we had the striations and the direction, even the color we used as we uncovered it. But the structure, again, massive. If you actually look to the left, you see a column coming up, and then you see a beam that's not really connected. Like there was, yeah, right there. So there's the structure. You could poke your finger through some of these beams that were so rotted because they were just, the terracotta was just absorbing water, and it was just, deteriorating the steel. And luckily we got to it at this point where they were able to replace it. I think, we replaced almost the top entire floor structure, down 2 floors. This shows again some of the construction and just the scaffolding, and just to get to these things was just massive, and the time it took to get this through. And as we went, we had to get approvals and resubmit drawings, and just to make sure that everyone was on the same page of what we were proposing. Because some of it, again, it was hard to find drawings that had it. So we, through research, just replicated it. A lot of the mechanicals, this building went through Sandy, so we, worked with moving some of the equipment and the boilers up to the upper floors, cogen. And again, this all has to function as a hotel. So again, we're trying to keep the floors with the minimum amount of mechanical. So again, we have a sub-cellar and the mechanicals on the roof, and tried to, we removed a lot of pressure tanks and water tanks on the roof, and tried to match almost the sort of mass of the new mechanicals to very closely to the old mechanicals. We also have 4 elevators, 3 that go all the way to the roof, and 1 just a lower 3 floors.
And the dome that you can see here is actually, this is solid copper that was cast in Germany. So that was the last element of the dome to go up, I think. Oh, I guess the ribs aren't there yet, but
yeah.
That was a big day. That was in the fall of 2019 that went up. But in this image, you can see sort of the balustrade is back. The urns aren't here yet, but you can see the cornice is on. So it's starting to look like the old bank. And now here, it is with the urns and the almost finished.
Yep. Yeah. So you can sort of see the roof. We got water retainage. We got the lighting, the new lights, and the facade lighting and the dome lighting. And these aren't the right light levels. These were just tests to make sure everything was working. But they're going to be very dim, muted lighting for the dome. The eagles, we tried very hard to find out where they were taken when they were taken down. We tried to reach the contractors that actually did the demolition work. But I think we came really close with Carrie helped find the eagles that were surrounding the dome.
So I think it's still not quite done, but it's nearly done. I think maybe fall of 2021, we anticipate having all of the work finalized. But as Ron said, we're coordinating with the State Historic Preservation Office, with landmarks, with DOB. So it's a pretty massive undertaking. But we're very grateful that the project just received a Lucy Moses Awards from the New York Landmarks Conservancy, which was a very nice acknowledgement of a decade of research and design and construction. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I actually hope that you will consider supporting LSP and all the work that they do in advocating for our neighborhoods and our quality of life, which historic preservation plays a large role in. And so with that, Ron, unless you have anything else to add, we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, I just like to also just thank the client, the owner, DLJ Capital Partners, to make this whole thing possible. Again, they were, very supportive of really trying to create this sort of work of art building at the time. And it was a great client to be able to work with. I'm thankful for that.
Well, thank you, Carrie and Ron, so much. It's a phenomenal presentation and a knock your socks off restoration project is, as far as I'm concerned, really amazing. There's really no other way to put it, and beautifully done. So we have some questions in the Q&A. People, you can still put in Q&A questions as we go through these. I'll just start from the beginning pretty much. As I said before, we might not be able to get through all of them, but we'll get through as many as we can. Someone asked about, will a recording of the presentation be available later? And the answer is yes. If you go to LSP's YouTube channel, which you can access through our website, which is shown here on the slide, lesp-nyc.org, you'll see we have several of our past webinars posted, and this one will be posted within about 2 weeks or so. If you join our YouTube channel, you actually get notified each time a webinar gets posted, so that you can catch things that you may not have had time to see initially. The next question is, how is the project financed? It's DLJ Capital Partners. I'm not sure how it's financed.
Well, in part with
yeah,
state and federal historic preservation tax credits. So at the time that this project started, this project qualified for both state and federal credits, and the qualification for state credits is based on census tract. And so this wasn't a qualifying census tract. And so that means that 20% of qualifying expenses are covered by the state and 20% by the federal, but it's a tax credit, not a grant. So those credits can be claimed after the project is finished.
Someone asked, when did the dome disappear, and that they may have missed this bit, but what happened to it?
It was disappearing over time. Parts of it were missing. In fact, I think if I go back through this to one of the early photos, I can show you. So it disappeared for good in 1990, but in 1990, it had already lost its columns, and there were sort of like these weird square supports that were up there. Let's see if I have a picture of that. So you can kind of see that these aren't the real columns. These are square supports, and the lantern was already missing by then. So this is 1977. And then by 1990, it was gone completely.
Okay. Was the cornice, I think this was mentioned also, but was the cornice done with terracotta or more modern, lighter material like fiberglass-based cement? I think you talked about that, but you could mention
Yeah,
it.
it was fiberglass. I think originally it seemed to be terracotta, with some major structure holding it back because there were pieces of where it was cut in the original one. So I don't, it didn't appear to be, like a sheet metal original terracotta, but now it's in fiberglass.
If the dome is cast in copper, will it eventually go green like the Statue of Liberty?
Yeah,
On
Carrie,
its
what was
way.
yeah, it's like 10 years, I think it takes, right?
Yes, yep, and it's already starting. So we're already getting some copper staining on our brand new beautiful ornament, but
Yeah.
that's how copper works. So
When hiring the craftsmen to restore the bank, were many from out of country, out of state, any New Yorkers?
Well,
yeah,
Carrie, I think, yeah.
it's a huge wide range. I mean, there were so many craftspeople and tradespeople who worked on this building. This was a massive, massive undertaking. And so most of the tradespeople are actually based in the city or around the city. We had a metal worker who did all of the metal worker, Vaslav Metalcraft, who is, I think, based upstate, but he did an amazing job recreating the windows and also some of the original storefront, which we didn't talk about, but the storefront along Canal Street, some pieces were there and many pieces were missing. So that's also being restored based on 1913 drawings that we found at the DOB. And that metalwork was all recreated by.
Yeah, and Essex Works, which was originally on Essex, did a
Yep.
lot of the work as well.
Yeah, Essex Works is who sculpted the cornucopia and the clock for the interior of the bank that was then sent to Italy to be carved in stone. So it was a mix. It was a wide-ranging mix of craftspeople and tradespeople.
So Ron, I think you answered part of this, but I'll say it again. I'll say the question. Who owns the building and what hotel chain is going to occupy it?
It's DLJ Capital Partners is the owner. I don't know if there is, I think it's an independent. It's not like a Marriott or anything like that. So I think it'll be more of a boutique independent hotel.
Here's an interesting question. For those of us who have dealt with this kind of issue, how did the building pass its local law 11 inspections in the past few decades? Was that rubberized cement product something that helped those inspections?
No, it just wasn't. It didn't pass. And I think we're still clearing local law inspections. It just was never done, and they would just be massive fines and violations that the new owner took on. And immediately we had Gase, which is a structural engineer, go through the facade. It was one of the first things we did. It's just such a hard process that we don't clear everything until we're finished. So yeah, it didn't, and it was a pretty dangerous situation. And that was one of the first things the owners did, was to make sure that they rectify any of the immediate dangers in the building. And we will be clearing these in the next few weeks, actually.
Someone asked about the cost of the project.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not privy to that.
And someone asked, the dome is so ornate and beautiful. Too bad you can't really see it from the street. Why is it that such beauty is not able to be seen? It's always a little bit of a mystery about a lot of New York architecture, but
That's how I felt about the cornice, the level of detail that was put into cornice that no one would ever be next to, especially not anybody maintaining it, since it was never maintained.
Yeah, well, I think now that it is a hotel, I think that is one of the great things about it. It's not just a condo building where, a few tenants can go up to the roof, but it's a public space. So I think it will be accessible to the community in far greater detail than it ever was in its entire history.
Yeah, there's no evidence that this was ever a space that anybody visited unless they were, servicing the roof.
Two questions related to terracotta replacement. Was terracotta replaced in kind at all on the building? And what is the percentage of fiberglass and I guess terracotta or the materials on the building as a whole?
We're actually not qualified to talk about that. The firm K&S was responsible for doing that work. And so it's a mix of where terracotta could be salvaged, it was salvaged. None of it was replaced in kind. Where it was replaced with either glass fiber reinforced plastic or concrete.
But one thing we did do was anything you can touch is in GFRC, the concrete. So there's nothing really that is, from the balustrade to the handrail. So everything that you can touch is very similar to terracotta in terms of the sort of feel of the materials.
Here's a question. The bricks were an odd size. You mentioned, can you describe the difference with standard bricks made today?
Standard bricks are a little more rectangular. These ones are squatter. They're almost more like Roman bricks, but they weren't quite Roman bricks. So they were a little
Yeah, they were like
longer,
1.25 by almost 12 inches. Like it was very strange with very, very thin joints. Very hard to replicate. And then when we had curved bricks and different corners and details that we had to replicate. And again, with the maintenance was terrible throughout the year, so there was a lot more damage, and we had to replace a lot of the bricks.
Someone asked that they noticed a pedimented doorway on the Canal Street side. One of the early photographs. Was that original, and is it still there?
It is original and it is still there. And that is part of the restoration work that I was just describing that Václav is doing. So you can see here, it's this piece. And this is all architectural metal. And this is the missing storefront that is being recreated in metal. And so that is original to the building. And that was the entrance to the elevator. Was that the entrance?
Yeah, that was the original elevator to the lofts.
Yeah. So it's been so long. So if you can see in the drawing here what the final storefront's going to look like. So from our research, looking at the original drawings by the architects, we realized that the upper transoms were those Luxfer prisms that were designed to cast light farther deeper into the building. And so that transom's being recreated in Luxfer prism.
Someone asked, how will the owners use the dome area and the roof in the future?
It will be part of the hotel. There's open space, the open roof with a small area as well that's enclosed with operable doors. There is a staircase up into the dome. This was, a whole, 74-711, which was a zoning approval to use the space because the building is overbuilt. So again, in terms of the time, just to get that through, to be able to occupy the dome, even though it was originally there, it wasn't. So we had to, go through the zoning process. So again, to make these things possible and for people to actually go in and enjoy this view and enjoy the structure, it just takes a lot of work and a lot of money to just try to, to push this thing through. It's so hard to get some of these things, from just the feasibility with the existing codes and regulations.
Right. And all of this on the roof, like this is not occupiable space. These are mechanicals. This is elevator bulkhead and cogen. So the actual usable outdoor space is this enclosed space, rather, is this little area.
And when the building was a bank, were the other floors apartments or offices?
I'm sorry, I breezed through that part of the history. They were garment lofts for the most part. They were advertised as lofts and offices. And in the research I did in the directories to try to understand who exactly was in there, it was mostly garment businesses. And then by the mid 20th century, it was a piano manufacturing. So it was piano company for many, many years until maybe the 60s.
And here's a very cool thing. Did you know that there was a metal coin bank made as a replica of this building?
It was actually made of a replica of the other building. It was the Jarmulowsky Bank on 165 East Broadway. That was, we actually puzzled over that for a long time because we didn't know about the 165 East Broadway building, and they were so, in a way, similar. So we found this bank at auction and did a little research, and then came upon the story of the other Jarmulowsky Bank at 165.
Unless this is some other
Yeah, unless you have,
bank that we don't know about. So if it is, we'd love to see it if it looks like this.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to shut that down.
Maybe they had a few. It's kind of like a, you know, a little giveaway.
Yes, if you do, yes, we would be very interested in seeing it. And we'll share our picture of the 165 bank with you.
And we can do one more question. Will there be a book written about this process?
You know, I know that the owner is doing a book. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know in terms of what the focus is, if it's on history or the renovation process. I know that they've been documenting a lot of videos. Obviously, we've all taken a lot of photographs and videos through the years. But yeah, there is something that's going to be written. I'm just not sure of the exact focus of what it is.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. As I mentioned before, if you missed some or all of tonight's presentation, or you know people who would like to see it, it will be posted within about 2 weeks on LESPY's YouTube channel, www.lesby-nyc.org, and that'll take you to a link to our YouTube channel. And keep an eye open for future LESPY webinars, including lectures and book talks. And next up is our City Council District 1 and District 2 Candidates Forum on June 2nd and June 1st, respectively, with a reminder to you all to please be sure to vote on June 22nd in the primaries. Is a very important election with a lot of ramifications, including for historic preservation. Also, in June, we hope to be restarting our live walking tours and other outdoor events. We're actually looking at doing a mixed live and Zoom walking tour, hopefully in June. So keep your eyes open for that. And if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with LESPY and our events and with preservation in the Lower East Side in general, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and we send out notifications periodically. Finally, please consider making a donation today, as Carrie generously mentioned, to LESPY at www.lesby-nyc.org. We need donations to help us to continue to produce our webinars, such as this one, and to continue our advocacy work for Lower East Side preservation. You can find a donate button again on our original invitation to this event and at the website shown here. For those of you who have already donated, I want to say thank you very much for your donations. And I want to thank Carrie and Ron again for a wonderful presentation, extremely informative and enlightening, and showing that there's great work going on out there and great news for our Lower East Side. So thank you everybody for attending, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Night.